Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The interest in James and Lily Potter arises from the fact that these characters were never fully revealed within the main series. They evoke love from fans, but let's take a fresh look at them and offer another perspective on these popular characters. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Lily and James are not that talented. Lily and James Potter were always considered talented wizards, but the story itself doesn't confirm this so clearly. Professor Snape called Lily a genius in potions, but as seen in Half-Blood Prince, his methods aren't that difficult to manipulate. If Harry could use Snape's book, why couldn't Lily use the same method? The question is, who was her friend? This leaves room for thought. James is credited with creating the Marauders map and becoming an animagus, but it's unclear what contribution he actually made to the creation of the map. And Peter Pettigrew, not exactly a talented wizard, also became an animagus. Number 2, Lily is too perfect. Harry certainly had an idealized view of his parents. This image was reinforced by numerous memories from other characters who describe Lily as beautiful, smart, and kind. But in reality, such an idealized image doesn't always evoke sympathy and can sometimes even be annoying. When a character has too many positive traits with no apparent flaws, they become flat and lacking in depth. Number 3, James and Lily are overrated. Although many characters praise James and Lily for their virtues, they themselves were never fully developed in the series. Voldemort destroyed them at the very beginning, and we only saw them through flashbacks. This created the illusion that they were outstanding characters. However, within the context of the main series, their roles are quite limited, and many viewers find them to be too flat and underappreciated. Number 4, Lily was not kind to Snape. The relationship between Lily and Snape is often portrayed as toxic, where Lily represents the idealized character and Snape the villain. But what if it was Lily who didn't show proper respect to her friend? James cruelly mocked Severus, but Lily did nothing to stop him. Although Snape apologized numerous times for his insults, Lily never accepted his apologies. This can be seen as arrogance on her part. Moreover, despite not stopping James, Lily ultimately married him. This raises questions about why she chose someone who treated her friend badly. Number 5, Lily and James shouldn't be together. It's no secret that Lily despised James for most of their time at Hogwarts. James was the Quidditch star and too proud of himself. Lily found his behavior off-putting. The books don't explain why her opinion of him changed, but some fans are convinced that their love was unconscious and didn't have a real foundation. Perhaps Lily wasn't so perfect after all, and she simply allowed her affection to overshadow her reasoning. Number 6. Lily couldn't have been that popular. Although Lily was often portrayed as a popular girl, little is actually known about her friends. We only know about Snape, who was her friend, but throughout the series, no other close friends of Lily are shown. While James's friends, like Sirius and Lupin, became a second family to Harry, there's no trace of Lily's friends. This calls into question her actual popularity and raises doubts about her social connections. Number 7, James didn't deserve redemption. Harry learned that his father wasn't the great man everyone thought him to be. James was a bully who sought attention, often treating others poorly, including Snape. Lupin and Sirius tried to explain his behavior by saying he had a good heart, but in reality, James never sought redemption for his actions and didn't try to change himself. He calmly finished school and continued his life, never reflecting on his mistakes. Number 8. James was a bad father. James Potter is often hailed as a selfless hero who sacrificed everything for his son. But what if his actions weren't entirely about protecting Harry, but rather about preserving his own ideals and reputation. James was a man who thrived on adventure and heroism. Did he truly sacrifice for his son, or did he sacrifice for the image of the heroic father he wanted to be remembered as? It's possible that in his final moments, James wasn't thinking about fatherhood, but about maintaining the legacy he'd always built for himself. His death left a void, and readers are left to imagine what kind of father he might have been had he lived longer. We don't know the true nature of James as a father because his life was cut short when Harry was just a baby. His reckless, impulsive nature suggests he might have struggled with the responsibilities of family life. James never had to face the full weight of fatherhood. It's easy to imagine Lily shouldering most of the parenting while James continued chasing his thrill-seeking adventures, never fully considering the impact on his family. He had always struggled with self-control and arrogance, traits that would likely have interfered with his ability to settle into the role of a responsible parent. Had he lived, would he have changed? Or would his love for excitement have continued to overshadow his role as a father? Number 9. Lily could have prevented the tragedy. One of the most heartbreaking events in the Harry Potter series is the death of the Potters, which marked the beginning of many subsequent tragedies. But what if Lily could have prevented it all by simply listening to Severus Snape? When he tried to warn her, she dismissed him, choosing to walk a different path with James instead. If only she had been more understanding, if only she had given Severus a chance. It's possible that he would have revealed Voldemort's plans sooner. By pushing Severus away, Lily unknowingly shut herself off from someone who might have saved her life. Snape, despite his faults, was on their side and had vital information that could have changed everything. Lily rejected the very person who could have helped her, and in doing so, sealed her fate. Her failure to listen to Snape adds another layer of tragedy to her story. It shifts the blame away from fate, suggesting that Lily's own choices played a significant role in the ultimate outcome. Number 10. James was a coward during school years. James Potter is often remembered as a brave and fearless wizard, but his actions as a student tell a different story. He and his friends, Sirius and Lupin, often ganged up on Severus Snape, bullying him in the corridors and humiliating him in front of others. James and his friends made sure to attack Snape when he was alone, says the book, showing that their courage didn't extend to standing up to him one-on-one. Instead, they used their numbers to their advantage, picking on someone weaker than themselves. This wasn't the behavior of a true hero. Deep down, James likely feared being rejected or left behind. His need for attention and approval from his peers led him to act out, even if it meant causing pain to others. He would do anything to stay popular, even if it meant making someone else feel worthless. This desire to be admired clouded his judgment and morality. He didn't seek bravery through noble actions. Instead, he sought status using his charm and wit to climb higher, no matter who was hurt along the way. James's behavior wasn't just about being tough, it was about masking a deep insecurity. A true hero stands up for others, regardless of the consequences, but James wasn't always that person. He didn't show real bravery when he made Snape the target of his cruelty. It wasn't courage, it was fear disguised as strength. His willingness to tear others down for his own gain raises the question, was he really the fearless leader he thought he was? Number 11. Their marriage was rushed. James and Lily's marriage is often seen as the ultimate love story, two souls destined to be together. But looking at the facts, their decision to marry was rushed, a product of youth and the pressures of the war. They were barely out of their teens when they tied the knot and became parents. Did they really understand what they were committing to? The war was in full swing, and people were making decisions based on urgency rather than careful thought. James and Lily were no exception. They acted quickly, perhaps believing that life was too short to wait. The circumstances of the war undoubtedly played a role in their quick decision to marry. The constant threat of death from Voldemort's forces could have made them feel that they needed to solidify their bond to create a family before it was too late. But as we see with their actions, this haste led to a lack of preparation for the future. They rushed into marriage thinking it would shield them from the inevitable, but it only made them more vulnerable. They didn't have the time to truly understand one another or fully consider the consequences of their decisions. In their youthful idealism, James and Lily believed in love conquering all. Yet they never had the time to develop a strong foundation for their relationship. They were too busy fighting a war to fight for their own relationship. Perhaps if they had taken a step back, they could have avoided some of the troubles that plagued them later on. Their marriage was built on the rush of war, not the quiet assurance of time-tested love. They may have been swept up in the whirlwind of their emotions, but that didn't make their choice any less impulsive. The consequences of their rushed marriage are clear in the way their lives ended. Their commitment to one another was genuine, but the haste with which they entered it left them with little room for growth. Had they taken their time, maybe they could have avoided the heartbreak and the tragedy that followed. In the end, their love story was overshadowed by the decisions they made in the heat of the moment. James and Lily's marriage was a beautiful one, but it was also a reminder that sometimes the fastest decisions aren't always the best ones. Number 12. Lily made a selfish choice with Peter. The decision to make Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper remains one of the most baffling choices in the Harry Potter series. While many blame James and Sirius for this mistake, it's worth considering that Lily might have had a hand in it as well. Why Peter is a question that lingers. He wasn't the most trustworthy or capable among their friends. In fact, he was the weakest link. And yet Lily, who was often seen as the embodiment of intelligence and caution, allowed him to carry the burden of their most crucial secret. Lily's decision to trust Peter shows a side of her that is not often discussed, her carelessness and selfishness. She didn't think through the consequences of her actions. While James and Sirius were perhaps blinded by their loyalty to their friend, Lily could have pushed for a better choice. It was a decision that required someone strong, someone unshakable. But Lily didn't insist on that. By agreeing to make Peter the secret keeper, she placed her own life, as well as James's and Harry's, in jeopardy. The consequences of this choice were dire. Peter, who could barely keep a secret, ultimately betrayed them. He revealed the Potter's location to Voldemort, leading to their deaths. She trusted the wrong person, and that trust cost her everything. This moment of neglect and poor judgment doesn't fit with the image of Lily as a flawless, intelligent hero. In fact, it shows how easily she could be swayed by sentiment and familiarity, even in matters of life and death. This decision to choose Peter as their secret keeper highlights Lily's egocentric side. It's a failure of judgment that sealed the fate of her family. Lily's brilliance wasn't enough to save her from this one critical mistake. She didn't see Peter for what he truly was, a coward and a traitor. Instead, she let sentiment cloud her judgment. And in the end, it was not her love for her family that protected them, but her blind trust in someone who ultimately betrayed her. Number 13. Lily looked down on her own family. Lily Potter is often portrayed as the kind and caring witch, always looking out for others. But when we look at her relationship with her sister Petunia, a different picture emerges. Petunia may have been difficult, but Lily's indifference toward her own sister speaks volumes. After leaving for Hogwarts, Lily never made an effort to reconcile with Petunia. In fact, it seems that she completely ignored her sister's feelings, despite Petunia clearly longing for her company. Lily was so absorbed in her magical world she never looked back. Lily's decision to cut ties with Petunia seems particularly cold when we consider the pain Petunia felt. She was envious, yes, but also desperate for her sister's affection. Petunia's bitterness wasn't just about jealousy, it was the result of feeling abandoned. It was as though Lily had forgotten her own flesh and blood the moment she stepped onto the Hogwarts Express. Despite the clear signals from Petunia, Lily made no attempt to bridge the gap. She didn't try to heal the rift or ease her sister's hurt. The idea of Lily as the perfect heroine begins to crack when we consider how easily she let her family go. Petunia was not an ideal sister, but she wasn't a villain either. Lily's refusal to acknowledge her sister's feelings, her failure to make any effort to reconnect, shows a lack of empathy. Lily had her new life, her new friends, her new world. Her old life seemed beneath her. This attitude doesn't align with the image of the perfect, selfless hero. It suggests that Lily was willing to overlook her family in favor of her own desires and accomplishments. When we step back and look at Lily's actions, it becomes clear. Her high-handedness toward Petunia was more than just a personal choice. It was a form of arrogance. She allowed her own happiness to blind her to the loneliness and resentment of her sister. In the end, it wasn't the magic that separated them, it was Lily's refusal to understand. Was it too much to ask for Lily, the supposed paragon of kindness, to reach out to the one person who still cared about her? It seems the answer is yes. Number 14. James risked his friends for fun. James Potter's decision to become an animagus is often hailed as a brave and ingenious feat, a true display of his talent and courage, but when you dig deeper, it's clear how reckless and dangerous that choice was. He risked the lives of his friends for nothing more than a thrill and to support Remus Lupin, who, as a werewolf, could not participate in their adventures. To help him feel included, James and his friends broke the law in a dangerous and thoughtless way. The transformation into animagi was not just about having fun, it was about pushing the limits of magic. James encouraged Sirius, Peter, and Remus to join him in this illegal and risky endeavor. They had no idea what they were getting into. The possibility of becoming werewolves themselves or falling prey to dark forces was a constant risk, but James didn't care. He was driven by the need for excitement, not by caution or responsibility. What's even more telling is how James never considered the potential consequences. Peter Pettigrew and Sirius Black ended up paying the price for his reckless choices. In the end, it was Peter who betrayed them all, but he only did so because of the chain of events James set into motion. Had James thought through the dangers of becoming an animagus, he might have realized that this sense of adventure was nothing but a dangerous game. In the heat of the moment, it seemed like harmless fun, but as time went on, the effects of James's actions became painfully clear. As Harry later reflects on his father's decisions, it's hard not to wonder whether the price was too high for a momentary thrill. James risked the lives of his friends for a laugh. Harry could have said, if he had known the full truth. Number 15, they could have joined the dark side. There is a fascinating yet unsettling idea that we often overlook when considering the lives of James and Lily Potter. We revere them as heroes, standing as paragons of bravery and righteousness, steadfast in their fight against Lord Voldemort and his followers. But what if the circumstances were different? What if, under other conditions, James and Lily could have ended up on the opposite side of the battle, aligning themselves with the very forces they fought so vehemently against? James Potter's character, as seen through the eyes of his classmates, was one of privilege, arrogance, and an undeniable drive to dominate. Throughout his years at Hogwarts, James exhibited a haughty superiority that often put him at odds with others, particularly Severus Snape. James's reckless behavior and his tendency to assert control over those around him demonstrated a certain thirst for power, something that in the wrong hands could easily spiral into the dark and dangerous realms of tyranny. While he eventually matured and came to embody the noble qualities that defined the Order of the Phoenix, his early years at Hogwarts were not without fault. He was not above using his status as a talented, popular wizard to assert his dominance over his peers, and it's easy to imagine that under different circumstances James might have been swayed by a more self-serving ideology. Lily Potter, on the other hand, was undeniably kind, compassionate, and morally upright. Yet these traits alone don't necessarily guarantee that she would have remained steadfast in her loyalty to the light. Lily's journey to becoming a key member of the Order of the Phoenix was not one marked by a fierce rebellion against the forces of darkness from the start. She, like many, was influenced by the social climate around her. At Hogwarts, Lily was friends with Severus Snape, a Slytherin with a darker side, but their bond was ultimately torn apart when Snape became involved with the Death Eaters. While Lily's choice to reject Voldemort's ideology and remain true to her principles was crucial, it wasn't a decision made in isolation. Her alignment with the forces of good was, in part, shaped by the relationships she formed and the people she chose to surround herself with. This brings us to a critical point. What if Lily had found herself in a different social circle? Slytherin House, with its cunning and ambition, often drew students who were willing to bend the rules for personal gain. Many of Voldemort's most loyal followers, including Bellatrix Lestrange, Lucius Malfoy, and Severus Snape himself, were once students at Hogwarts with Lily and James, and while the latter made the choice to fight against dark forces, the former embraced them. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where Lily's empathy and desire for connection could have been manipulated or redirected. What if, during a moment of vulnerability, she had become enamored with the idea of power that Voldemort and his followers so ardently believed in? Moreover, James and Lily's defiance against the Dark Lord was shaped by the events of their time, by their families, and by the people they trusted. The Potters were fortunate in that they were both born into families with strong values, and both had influences in their lives that kept them grounded in the fight for justice. Yet the Potters could have easily fallen prey to the same temptations as others. Lily's refusal of Snape's offers of friendship was rooted in her understanding of his growing darkness. But what if her perception had been clouded, or what if she had remained more deeply entangled in the world of Slytherin? Would she have been more willing to listen to the rhetoric of the Death Eaters, who promised a new world order where those with power would reign supreme? In the case of James, his ambition and sense of entitlement were precisely the qualities that made him a likely candidate to join the ranks of Voldemort's followers. James was a highly talented wizard, a talented Quidditch player, and the center of attention in his youth. These traits are often the very same ones that make it easy for dark forces to manipulate individuals, as they can promise power, prestige, and a sense of superiority. A different choice, a different turning point in his life might have led James down the path of darkness, where he could have easily become one of Voldemort's most trusted lieutenants, rising to power by exploiting the fear and hatred of those around him. Perhaps the most striking example of how circumstances influence James and Lily's choices is seen in the lives of their contemporaries, such as Severus Snape and Bellatrix Lestrange. Snape, once a close friend of Lily's, became one of Voldemort's most trusted and devoted followers. His story is one of tragedy, but also one of choices made under immense pressure. Snape's path could have easily been that of a hero had circumstances played out differently. He was a brilliant student, a capable wizard, and someone who could have led a very different life. However, Snape's decisions, influenced by his insecurities, his feelings of betrayal, and his desire for power, pushed him towards Voldemort's cause. And yet, when Snape ultimately chose to turn against Voldemort for love, he embodied the complexity of the human soul. He proved that even those who are swayed by the darkest forces can redeem themselves, given the right motivations. Number 16. James never respected Lily's wishes. James Potter's relationship with Lily Evans is often depicted as the quintessential schoolyard romance. Their love story, chronicled through Harry's memories and the tales told by others, is portrayed as the stuff of fairy tales, the bold, popular boy who wins the heart of the more reserved and intellectual girl. However, when you peel away the layers of nostalgia and examine their relationship through a different lens, a darker, more troubling narrative begins to emerge. In this narrative, James Potter's actions toward Lily suggest that, despite his charm and determination, he never fully respected her autonomy or desires, and his actions often crossed the line from persistence into obsession. Throughout their time at Hogwarts, James was known for his boisterous, attention-grabbing antics. As a student, he was charming, confident, and popular, attributes that made him well-liked by his peers. Lily, on the other hand, was more introverted and focused on her studies, qualities that set her apart from James's crowd. Despite their differences, James became infatuated with Lily early on. However, his attempts to win her affections were not based on any real understanding of who Lily was as a person. Instead, they were driven by his desire to possess her, to have her as a prize to prove his own worth. It wasn't just that James wanted Lily's love, he wanted to prove that he could get it, that he could conquer her heart in the same way he had conquered every other challenge in his life. In the early days of their relationship, James's pursuit of Lily became an obsession. He relentlessly followed her around, constantly trying to win her over with grand gestures and boasts about his accomplishments. His persistence, although it might have seemed charming to some, was never taken lightly by Lily. She rejected him time and time again, not because she disliked him, but because she wanted to make it clear that she wasn't interested in someone who didn't take her own desires into account. Lily was independent, strong-willed, and had no patience for James's egotistical antics. Despite this, James continued to press on, dismissing her rejections as mere obstacles to overcome rather than respecting her boundaries. In fact, his actions sometimes crossed the line from persistence into harassment. The idea that Lily might not have reciprocated his feelings was anathema to James, who had always been the center of attention and used to getting what he wanted. He viewed her rejections as temporary setbacks rather than as a legitimate refusal, something that reveals a lack of emotional maturity and empathy for Lily's perspective. This behavior is particularly evident when we consider how James reacted after Lily's consistent refusals. Instead of backing off and allowing her the space to make her own decisions, James ramped up his efforts. It's crucial to consider how Lily might have felt during this time. In the context of their school years, Lily was a young woman still finding her voice, Her intelligence, sense of independence, and strong moral compass were defining qualities that set her apart from many of her peers. She wasn't a girl who could be easily swayed by flattery or forceful advances, and yet she found herself the object of James's obsession. Every time she rejected him, James pushed harder, reinforcing the idea that her will didn't matter as much as his own. His persistence didn't stem from a genuine understanding or respect for Lily's desires, but from his belief that he was entitled to her love as though it was something he deserved by virtue of his own. Self-perceived greatness. James never seemed to understand that Lily's rejection was not a personal affront to him, but rather a statement of her own agency. In fact, he likely saw her rejections as a challenge, something to overcome, rather than a reflection of her wishes. His pursuit of her was less about understanding her as a person and more about asserting his control over the situation. This dynamic reveals a deeper flaw in his character, his inability to recognize Lily as an autonomous individual with her own desires and boundaries. His attitude toward her was far from romantic. It was possessive. Eventually, after years of this persistent pursuit, Lily relented and agreed to date James. But was this decision born out of genuine affection for him, or was it the result of sheer exhaustion? After all, the relentless attention James showered upon her would have worn anyone down. It's entirely possible that Lily, tired of rejecting him and worn down by his constant presence, finally gave in. Not because she had fallen in love with him, but because she had grown weary of the battle. In this light, their eventual romance seems less like the idealized tale of a persistent lover winning the heart of the woman of his dreams, and more like a story of emotional coercion. Lily's eventual acceptance of James's love could be interpreted as a response to his persistence rather than a reflection of her own feelings. At no point did James truly stop to consider whether Lily genuinely wanted to be with him or whether she was merely acquiescing to the pressure he had exerted over the years. Their relationship then becomes a tragedy of sorts, a romance that was built on the foundation of James's selfishness and disregard for Lily's autonomy. Even when they were together, James's actions often focused on his own desires and ambitions rather than respecting Lily's individuality. When they were married and had Harry, James's lack of consideration for Lily's wishes persisted. Despite their shared love for each other, James's view of marriage seemed to be one in which his own desires took precedence over Lily's. He never truly understood the depths of her independence and strength. This imbalance in their relationship may have been one of the reasons that even though they were married and had a family, Lily's death was a profound loss for her. Not just because of her untimely end, but because she had never fully been able to assert her identity as her own. Number 17, Lily used James to forget Snape. James Potter and Lily Evans were a couple whose relationship, when looked at through a different lens, offers a perspective on their love that is often overlooked by fans of the Harry Potter series. Most readers assume that Lily's decision to be with James was based on genuine affection and love. However, there is an intriguing alternative interpretation. What if Lily's choice was not driven by love for James, but by a need to escape her unresolved feelings for Severus Snape? What if James was simply a means to forget the emotional turmoil she had endured with Severus? In this interpretation, their relationship becomes less of a fairy tale romance and more of a complicated and reluctant escape. Lily and Severus shared a bond that from the very beginning was marked by a deep connection that transcended their differences. As children, they had a shared history that bonded them together. However, over time, Severus's descent into the darker side of magic and his growing association with the Death Eaters created an insurmountable rift between them. Lily was left heartbroken and confused, torn between the boy she had once cared for and the man he was becoming. Severus's actions, especially his involvement in the bullying of her friends and his eventual betrayal, tore at Lily's soul, leaving her with emotional scars. It was against this backdrop that Lily's feelings toward James Potter began to develop. James, with his brash confidence, his charm, and his steady presence, became the antithesis to Severus. He represented safety, stability, and a future free from the toxicity that Severus had introduced into her life. But James was not Lily's first love. Severus had been, and there was a part of her that had not fully let go of him. James became a safe harbor from the storm of unresolved feelings she had for Severus. In many ways, he was the person Lily chose because he was easy. He provided the comfort and security that Severus could never offer, but that didn't necessarily mean she was in love with him. Lily's decision to marry James, then, can be seen as less a love story and more a pragmatic decision to move on. She had been deeply hurt by Severus, and perhaps, in her heart, she still mourned the loss of the boy she had once trusted. But she could not stay in the past, clinging to a relationship that had spiraled into something dangerous and emotionally damaging. Severus had become someone she could no longer trust or love in the same way. In this light, James's role in her life shifts from the passionate ideal of true love to that of a psychological escape. He was the person who allowed her to silence the painful echoes of Severus's betrayal. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry learns from Sirius that his father James had been arrogant and full of himself, especially in his school years. James's behavior, particularly towards Severus, was less than exemplary. He bullied Severus and showed no remorse for it. However, this cruel behavior may have been a reflection of his own insecurity and his need to prove himself, rather than an inherent flaw in his character. To Lily, James might have represented everything Severus was not. He was outgoing, accepted by the wizarding world, and, perhaps most importantly, safe. In choosing James, Lily may have been trying to escape the toxic pull of Severus's dark influence. While this perspective does not invalidate the love between James and Lily, it does suggest that their bond might not have been as pure as many fans believe. It is important to remember that love is complex, and people are often driven by subconscious motivations and desires that they themselves may not fully understand. Lily's feelings towards Severus were filled with both love and resentment, creating an emotional storm that she needed to escape. Choosing James, then, was not necessarily an act of passionate love, but a decision driven by a need for emotional stability. Moreover, it is essential to consider the emotional toll that Lily's relationship with Severus had taken on her. From a young age, she had been exposed to the harshness of Severus's world, his involvement with the Slytherins, his bullying of her friends, and his eventual allegiance with the Death Eaters. Severus's obsession with Lily, which bordered on unhealthy, added a layer of complexity to their relationship. She had been torn between a sense of loyalty to the boy she had once cared about and the growing fear of the person he was becoming. This emotional roller coaster left her weary, and when James appeared on the scene, he offered her a chance at something simpler, more secure, and less emotionally demanding. In many ways, choosing James allowed Lily to bury the pain of her relationship with Severus, a relationship that had once been full of promise, but had ultimately ended in heartbreak. By choosing someone who seemed so different from Severus, someone who was confident, assured, and full of promise, Lily was not choosing James for the right reasons. She was choosing him because he allowed her to close a chapter in her life that she was not emotionally ready to face. It was easier to fall for James, someone who was safe and predictable, than to face the painful truth of what her relationship with Severus had become. Number 18, Lily wasn't as peaceful as people think. Lily Potter was a woman of extraordinary beauty and intelligence, yet her life unfolded in the shadows of an extraordinary conflict. In the magical world of Harry Potter, where danger and dark forces loomed at every turn, Lily's actions often seem incongruent with the harsh reality she faced. She was brilliant, perceptive, and deeply compassionate, but she remained alarmingly blind to the dangers building around her. Perhaps, in her innocence or her unwavering belief in the goodness of others, Lily never truly grasped the severity of the situation at hand. Instead of confronting the darkness that threatened to engulf the wizarding world, Lily clung to the belief that kindness, understanding, and love could somehow repair what was already broken beyond repair. At the heart of this blindness was Lily's relationship with Severus Snape. In many ways, Snape was a reflection of her own youthful idealism. He was the boy from Spinner's End, a quiet, awkward child who came from an abusive, unloving home. Lily had seen him as a victim, an outsider like herself, and in her innocence she believed that her kindness and her friendship could make a difference. To her, he was still the boy from the alley, the child who had shared her childhood years before the rift had torn them apart. Even when Snape grew distant, his bitterness toward her and his increasingly erratic behavior, Lily held on to the idea that he was fundamentally good. She couldn't, or wouldn't, believe that Severus could fall victim to the same darkness that was spreading like a cancer throughout the wizarding world. She was wrong, tragically wrong. Lily's idealism wasn't just evident in her relationship with Snape, it extended to the entire world around her. While the world fell deeper into turmoil, Lily appeared to be detached from the reality of the wizarding war. Her idealism painted the magical world in softer, more optimistic hues, as though it was still a world of childhood wonder. The growing power of Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters was something that, despite warnings, she seemed to dismiss or underestimate. She believed, like many, that kindness and love could act as a shield against the brutality of the forces at play. She couldn't conceive of the world becoming a place where such virtues could not prevail. Her refusal to see the depth of the darkness creeping through her world wasn't just ignorance, it was a form of denial. Lily's insistence on seeing the good in people, even those who were undeniably spiraling toward evil, left her blind to the deeper currents pulling the world toward destruction. Take, for instance, her failure to see Snape's gradual descent into the ranks of Voldemort's followers. She had witnessed firsthand his animosity toward her, his jealousy of James Potter, and his association with unsavory characters, yet she didn't connect the dots. She thought she could reach him, that he could still be saved, that his darkening path was something she could change with enough compassion. But she was fooling herself. The Severus Snape she knew no longer existed. The man he was becoming was far removed from the boy she had once tried to save. Lily's belief in redemption, however noble, blinded her to the true dangers of the world she lived in. As Voldemort's influence spread, the wizarding world grew more divided, with many turning a blind eye to the rising evil or justifying it in the name of blood purity. And while Lily was not complicit in these dark ideologies, she was still tragically unaware of the extent of the corruption taking root around her. She failed to see that the rising power of the Death Eaters wasn't something that could be reasoned with. It wasn't something that could be solved with compassion or dialogue. The world, in its radical shift toward darkness, needed more than words. It needed action, and Lily was hesitant to take the steps that would have made a real difference. This disconnect between Lily's idealism and the brutal reality around her became even more evident as she raised her own family. She and James Potter had a son, Harry, and their love for him was apparent to all who knew them. But their love, while pure and powerful, was not enough to shield Harry from the dangers of the world. Lily and James, despite their best intentions, failed to recognize how deep the threat from Voldemort had become. They believed that their love, their secretive life in hiding, could protect their family. But their enemies were not so easily outwitted, and their refusal to see the full scope of the darkness surrounding them would ultimately lead to their downfall. Lily was, in many ways, a mother like many others, fiercely protective, deeply loving, and determined to provide a better world for her child. But she wasn't just a mother, she was also a woman of her time, a time when a battle between light and dark seemed increasingly inevitable. Her decision to refuse to flee, to stay and fight, was a testament to her bravery and her devotion. But it also underscored her naivety. By staying in the world she had always known, she allowed herself to be caught in the snare of the dark forces that had been steadily tightening their grip. She believed, perhaps naively, that her home, her love, and her will to do good would be enough to protect them. But Voldemort's cruelty was not something that could be defeated with love alone. Lily's refusal to escape, to acknowledge the full scale of the danger they were facing, left her and her family vulnerable. The ultimate tragedy of Lily Potter's life was not simply that she died protecting her son, it was that she died because she failed to fully understand the world in which she lived. Her belief that love could shield them from harm, her failure to confront the dark reality, was both her strength and her fatal flaw. While many around her, like James Potter, were willing to take action to protect their family by going into hiding or fighting openly against Voldemort, Lily remained tied to her idealism, to the belief that there was always room for reconciliation, always a way to undo the damage done. She couldn't see that for some things there was no going back. The darkness that surrounded them was not something that could be reasoned away. Lily's fate, while tragic, is not without a certain poignancy. Her life and her death serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of ignoring the harshness of the world in favor of preserving an idealized vision of what it should be. Her refusal to see Snape's descent into darkness, her belief that she could change him, and her decision to remain in a world that was rapidly spiraling toward destruction, all speak to a kind of innocence that in the end proved to be her undoing. Lily Potter's love for her son was unwavering, but it was also blinding. It made her believe that the world could be saved by simple goodness and pure intentions. She failed to see that in times of great darkness, sometimes the only thing that matters is the ability to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And yet, in her death, Lily Potter did become a symbol of love and sacrifice, a symbol that would inspire her son and countless others in the fight against the forces of darkness. Her sacrifice was not in vain, but her inability to confront the dark reality of her world, her refusal to believe that things could not be changed through kindness alone, is a lesson that remains painfully relevant. In the end, Lily Potter's legacy is a reminder that love, while powerful, must be tempered by an understanding of the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Number 19. James was obsessed with being a hero. James Potter was, in his youth, a character that many would describe as the epitome of the hero archetype. He was the daring Gryffindor, the one who stood up to bullies, the one who always appeared to have the courage to do the right thing. But, like many things in life, appearances can be deceiving, and there is more to James than the heroic image he projected to the world. For a significant portion of his young life, James was driven not by a true desire to protect others or stand up for justice, but by a desperate need to maintain the image of a hero. His behavior was more about posturing and self-promotion than genuine selflessness, and his obsession with being seen as a savior led him into some darker corners of his character. One of the first clues that James' obsession with heroism was not entirely selfless can be seen in his interactions with Severus Snape. While it's easy to paint Snape as the villain of their relationship, it's crucial to recognize that James was not entirely innocent either. His bullying of Snape, though never excused, was in part a product of his own desire to maintain a heroic identity. To James, Snape was the perfect foil, an outsider, an easy target against which he could assert his dominance. When James antagonized Snape, he wasn't just putting him in his place, he was reinforcing the narrative that he, James Potter, was the brave Gryffindor, the one who could stand up to anyone, even the most irritating and unpopular student. By belittling Snape, James was enhancing his own image as a hero, a protector of the weak, though his actions lacked the true nobility of that role. The bullying incident when James humiliated Snape in front of Lily Evans is a perfect example of this. In that moment, James was not simply defending Lily or standing up for what was right. He was performing. The public nature of the humiliation, the theatricality of his bravado, was about reinforcing his reputation in front of others, particularly Lily. It was about showing off, about ensuring that everyone saw him as the bold and daring figure he so desperately wanted to be. Lily, of course, did not appreciate this. Her disapproval marked a significant turning point in their relationship, but it also revealed a deep flaw in James's character, his need for validation. Rather than seeing Snape as a person or considering the consequences of his actions, James was fixated on how his behavior would be perceived by others, especially Lily. This was not the mark of a true hero, but rather of someone obsessed with the image of heroism. James's obsession with maintaining his status as the heroic figure did not end with Snape. His bravado was a constant throughout his youth, even among his closest friends. In many ways, James was a leader, but not necessarily in the way that we traditionally think of leadership. He was a leader because he was charismatic, because he commanded attention, and because he reveled in the admiration of those around him. But there was a certain arrogance and entitlement that accompanied his leadership. He was always right, always the one who took charge, and he often took great pride in that. He was, in essence, more concerned with being admired and feared than he was with genuinely caring for his friends or considering their feelings. His friendship with Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew was built on the same foundation, a mutual admiration of James's fearless persona, not necessarily on deeper emotional bonds. When James was finally faced with the challenge of truly becoming a hero, the stakes were much higher than they had ever been before. In the fight against Voldemort, James was not just trying to impress his friends or win the affection of Lily Evans. He was fighting for something much greater, the lives of those he loved, the very survival of his family. This moment, however, was not simply a moment of personal growth for James. It was, in many ways, a culmination of the character traits he had been developing throughout his life, particularly his selflessness. He had made many mistakes in his youth, but when it came to protecting his family, James showed that he was willing to give up everything, including his life, to ensure their safety. In that final act of bravery, he became a true hero. The sacrifices he made, particularly for his wife Lily and son Harry, were heroic in a way that was not driven by ego or the desire for recognition. His death was the ultimate price, and it was only at that moment that James proved, beyond any doubt, that he had become the man he had always wanted to be. Yet, even in his final sacrifice, James's earlier flaws were not completely erased. He was not the perfect hero that many might want to imagine. His past behavior, particularly his treatment of Snape, cast a long shadow over his actions. James had been arrogant, impulsive, and insensitive in his youth. His obsession with appearing heroic had often led him to make decisions that were more about his ego than about true righteousness. The fact that James had matured and changed, and that he had ultimately become a true hero, does not absolve him of his earlier mistakes. He had to grow into his heroism, and in doing so he became someone capable of making the ultimate sacrifice. But that does not mean that his earlier life was a flawless narrative of bravery and selflessness. It was a journey full of contradictions, flaws, and imperfections. Lily Evans, James's wife, was a woman who saw beyond James's heroic facade. She loved him for his kindness, his generosity, and his courage, but she also saw his weaknesses. She understood that James had an ego, that he often acted impulsively, and that he struggled to understand the feelings of others. But she also saw the potential within him. Lily was not blinded by his charm or his reputation. She saw the person he could be, and she loved him for it. It was this love, this understanding, that allowed James to mature and become the man who would ultimately sacrifice everything for his family. Lily's influence on James was undeniable. She helped him realize that being a hero was not about impressing others, but about protecting those who mattered most. Their relationship was a complicated one, filled with both love and tension, but it was also a partnership that allowed James to become a better man. The life and legacy of James Potter are full of contradictions. On one hand, he was the bold, brave Gryffindor who fought to protect his family and the wizarding world. On the other hand, he was a young man obsessed with the image of himself as a hero, driven by ego and a need for admiration. The complexities of his character are what make him such a fascinating figure in the Harry Potter universe. He was not a perfect hero, nor was he always the brave and selfless individual he came to be remembered as. His journey was one of growth, of learning from his mistakes, and of becoming the man he was destined to be. But it is important to remember that James Potter was not simply born a hero. He had to learn what it meant to truly be one, and that process was messy, complicated, and at times flawed. Number 20, their death is romanticized too much. The deaths of Lily and James Potter are one of the most poignant moments in the Harry Potter series. Their tragic end is often depicted as the ultimate act of love and sacrifice, and indeed, their deaths have become a symbol of courage, heroism, and the power of familial love. However, as we gaze upon their story from the perspective of time, it becomes clear that there is more to their demise than just heroism. The deaths of Lily and James were not simply the result of Voldemort's evil or an innocent misunderstanding. They were, in fact, the culmination of a series of flawed decisions, misguided actions, and misplaced trust. At the heart of their story is the betrayal of their friend Peter Pettigrew, who played a pivotal role in their deaths. As one of the Marauders, James had once shared a bond of camaraderie and loyalty with Pettigrew, whom they trusted completely. This trust, however, would prove fatal. Lily and James' willingness to blindly trust Pettigrew, even after his behavior became increasingly suspicious, was one of the critical mistakes that led to their downfall. It is easy to understand why they trusted him. After all, the Marauders were like brothers. But this blind trust, while noble in its loyalty, was also dangerous. They should have known that their fight against Voldemort would require them to be cautious, to stay vigilant against any threat, even from within their own circle. While their decision to rely on Pettigrew was a tragic mistake, another factor that contributed to their deaths was their refusal to take more extreme precautions. When Voldemort's forces were growing stronger, the Potters had the option of going into hiding earlier, but they chose instead to stay in their home, continuing to live their lives as they always had. This decision was based on a sense of optimism and a belief in the protection of love, a belief that made them less willing to take the more extreme measures necessary for survival. The Potters chose the safety of their family home over the full measure of the protections that could have kept them safe, like the Fidelius charm, which would have hidden their location from the dark. Lord. In their decision to stay in Godric's Hollow, they left themselves vulnerable. The Fidelius charm was, after all, not an option they had fully embraced, and their reluctance to completely isolate themselves from the world of their old friends was a testament to their idealism. The idealism of youth, the belief that love would conquer all, blinded them to the necessity of caution and strategic retreat. The world of war was not one where such naive hopes could protect them, and this became painfully clear when Voldemort arrived at their doorstep, armed with the betrayal of Pettigrew. Another element of their deaths that is often overlooked is the role that their sense of responsibility played in the outcome. It is clear that both Lily and James had a deep love for their son Harry, and that their desire to protect him was the driving force behind their decisions. But their love for their son, while pure, could have clouded their judgment at times. They were willing to risk everything for the fight against Voldemort, and in doing so, they placed the ultimate responsibility on their shoulders. Their deaths became a symbol of the sacrifices that parents are willing to make for their children, but there is a darker side to this narrative. They did not always consider the full consequences of their actions, especially in regards to their son's future. The tragic irony of their deaths is that, despite their love and their sacrifice, their decisions ultimately led to Harry becoming an orphan and a target for the Dark Lord. Lily and James had chosen to fight Voldemort with everything they had, but they did not stop to consider how their actions would affect their child. They did not take the necessary steps to ensure his survival beyond their own death. Their desire to keep fighting, to stand firm against the darkness, blinded them to the reality that they were not invincible. Their deaths, though heroic, also raised questions about the wisdom of their choices. Moreover, the death of Lily and James left a legacy of grief and trauma that Harry would carry with him for the rest of his life. The selflessness of their sacrifice is undeniable, but the impact on Harry is also undeniable. He was left with a scar, both physical and emotional, and an unshakable sense of loss. His whole life was shaped by their deaths, and while he found strength in their memory, he was also burdened by it. The narrative of their deaths, then, is not just a tale of sacrifice, but a tale of the unintended consequences that arise from the choices made by those who, despite their best intentions, fail to fully understand the gravity of their actions. In the end, James and Lily's deaths should not be viewed solely through the lens of romanticized heroism. Their choices, though driven by love, were flawed and could have been different. They trusted the wrong people, ignored the signs of danger, and allowed their idealism to override their common sense. While they did make incredible sacrifices, they were not flawless beings, and their story is a reminder that even the most well-intentioned people can make mistakes. It is not enough to simply love and sacrifice. One must also be responsible and aware of the consequences of their actions. Harry's life and the decisions he would later make are, in part, shaped by the lessons he learned from his parents' mistakes. Throughout the series, Harry grows to understand the importance of making hard choices, of trusting the right people, and of taking responsibility for his own actions. The heroic path is not just about grand gestures of love, it is about the choices we make, the wisdom to recognize when to act and when to retreat, and the courage to accept responsibility for the outcomes of those choices. James and Lily's deaths are tragic, but they are also a cautionary tale about the need for balance between love and responsibility. Their deaths, in a sense, remind us that heroism is not about living without fear, but about taking responsibility for our actions even in the face of that fear. The Potters may have fought bravely, but they also failed to take the necessary precautions that might have saved them and spared their son the life of an orphan. It is not just their love that made them heroes, but the willingness to accept the hard truths that come with being responsible for those we love. In the end, we must remember that heroism is not without flaws, and it is often the mistakes of the past that shape the heroes of the future. So, when we look at the story of Lily and James, let us not forget that while their deaths were undeniably tragic, they also serve as a reminder that the cost of heroism is often greater than we anticipate. They may have died for love, but their mistakes were part of the legacy that Harry would inherit. Heroism is not a simple matter of sacrifice. It is about taking responsibility for the choices we make and the lives we touch. And perhaps, in the end, this is the greatest lesson that James and Lily's story can teach us. Number 21, they weren't ready to be parents. In the heart of the wizarding world, amidst the constant dangers and ever-present shadow of Voldemort's reign, the birth of Harry Potter was not merely the arrival of a child, but a symbol of hope. Yet from another perspective, it could also be seen as an act of unpreparedness, an impulsive decision driven by love, yes, but also by naivety and the harsh realities of a war-torn world. James and Lily Potter were two of the bravest people of their time, undoubtedly, but they were also young, idealistic, and, in many ways, unready for the responsibility of parenthood. It wasn't just that they were fighting a Dark Lord, it was that the world they chose to bring a child into was one where survival was uncertain. They were surrounded by danger, their home was on the front lines of the war, and the threat of death loomed at every turn. In that context, the decision to have a child seemed, at best, reckless. They lived in a time where Voldemort's followers, the Death Eaters, were relentlessly hunting down anyone who opposed them. They were surrounded by death on all sides, and yet, in the midst of this turmoil, James and Lily chose to bring life into the world. This act, born of love and a sense of hope, might have seemed like a defiant gesture, a symbol of resistance against the darkness. But it was also an act that, in retrospect, seems full of uncalculated risks. They brought Harry into a world where the Dark Lord would stop at nothing to kill him. While their decision to have a child could be seen as an expression of optimism, it was also one of startling naivety. James and Lily did not escape Britain when the war escalated. They did not take the extreme measures that might have kept Harry safer, such as fleeing to a safer location or taking stronger precautions with his protection. Instead, they stayed in the thick of it, fighting alongside others in the Order of the Phoenix. Their love for their son was undeniable, but love alone, as they would soon learn, could not shield him from the danger that hung over their heads like a guillotine. In fact, it wasn't just that they didn't flee, they didn't even take the most basic steps to ensure Harry's safety. The Fidelius Charm, a powerful protection spell, could have hidden their location from Voldemort. They could have used this charm to keep their family safe. But they didn't. James and Lily, in their confidence, thought that their defiance, their strength, and their refusal to yield to fear would be enough to protect Harry. But that decision cost them dearly. They underestimated the gravity of the threat and paid the ultimate price. As young parents, they were undoubtedly overwhelmed by the challenges of raising a child in the midst of a war. But Harry was no ordinary child. He was the boy who lived, the one person who could defeat Voldemort. And yet, despite this extraordinary responsibility, they failed to take the necessary precautions. James and Lily's love for Harry, their sense of duty to the fight against Voldemort, and their desire to make a stand were all noble, but their failure to fully protect their son speaks to a certain immaturity. Their devotion to each other and to their cause, while admirable, clouded their judgment when it came to the practical realities of keeping their child safe. It's easy to imagine that in their hearts, James and Lily wanted to live in a world where Voldemort was no longer a threat, where they could raise Harry in peace, and where their love could give their child the security he needed. But the world they lived in was far from peaceful, and their desire to live freely, to act on their love, was, in the end, their undoing. They were so focused on fighting the war, on resisting Voldemort, that they neglected to consider the very real danger that their son would be in as long as they remained in his path. The love that James and Lily had for Harry was palpable. It was a love that transcended everything else in their lives, and their sacrifice for him was an act of pure devotion. But love, no matter how deep, could not shield them from the harsh realities of war. The Voldemort they faced was not the kind of enemy who could be defeated with good intentions alone. Harry's safety was not something that could be taken for granted, and it's clear now that James and Lily underestimated just how dangerous the world had become. Their failure to secure Harry's safety reflected their inability to see the world for what it had become, a place where every choice, no matter how small, had life or death consequences. After their deaths, Harry was left vulnerable, exposed to the very danger his parents had tried so hard to protect him from. Their love for him was, in the end, not enough to save them or him. When Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow that fateful night, he came prepared. He knew exactly what he was doing. James and Lily, on the other hand, were caught off guard. The fact that they had not taken every possible measure to protect their son showed a flaw in their thinking. It wasn't that they didn't love Harry, but that love was not enough to overcome the obstacles they faced. Even after their deaths, James and Lily's legacy lived on in Harry's heart. He grew up with their love and their memory, but also with the consequences of their unpreparedness. The fact that Harry survived Voldemort's killing curse was a miracle, but it was also a reflection of how much James and Lily had tried and how much they had failed. Their decision to remain in Britain, to stand and fight rather than retreat to safety, was a noble one, but it was also a decision that ultimately cost them their lives and put their son in mortal danger. What makes this situation even more tragic is that had they made different choices, had they fled, taken more extreme measures to protect Harry, or used the powerful magical defenses available to them, they might have lived to see their son grow up in safety. They might have been able to provide the kind of childhood for Harry that he deserved, free from the constant threat of death. Instead, they left Harry to face the world alone, without them, in a world that had become far more dangerous than they ever imagined. In the end, James and Lily's decision to have a child in such a perilous time was a testament to their courage, their love, and their hope for a better world. But it was also a decision shaped by the kind of youthful naivety that can blind even the most well-meaning parents to the dangers around them. They wanted to believe that love and bravery would be enough to protect Harry, but in the end, they learned that survival in a world like theirs required more than just those qualities. It required foresight, caution, and an understanding of the gravity of the situation. They were parents who loved their child deeply, but in the end, they were unprepared for the terrifying world they had chosen to bring him into. Their sacrifice is a poignant reminder that sometimes even the most loving decisions can have tragic consequences. Harry's life, from the moment he was born, was filled with danger that James and Lily, despite their best intentions, did not see coming. And in their absence, Harry was left to face that danger alone, a fate shaped by the decisions of his young, brave, but ultimately unprepared parents. Number 22, they forgave Sirius too easily. In the Harry Potter series, the tragic deaths of Lily and James Potter serve as a pivotal moment in the broader narrative, influencing not only the protagonist's journey, but also the lives of those closest to them. The sudden death of the Potters at the hands of Lord Voldemort is a moment fraught with emotion, mystery, and above all, betrayal. The accusations against Sirius Black for being the Potter's secret keeper are quickly accepted by the wizarding world, and his fate is sealed long before any investigation into the truth can be conducted. But if one takes a step back and looks at the situation from a different perspective, it's easy to wonder, why did Lily and James forgive Sirius so quickly, given the circumstances that led to their untimely demise? Could there have been more to the story? Could there have been an error in judgment on their part? Sirius Black, once the best friend of James Potter and a member of the Marauders, is blamed for the betrayal of the Potters. The wizarding world assumes that he is the one who revealed the Potters' location to Voldemort, which leads to their deaths. It's a tragic turn of events, one that not only devastates Harry, but also deeply impacts Sirius. When we look closely, however, there are several contradictions in the way the Potters' deaths are presented, and the rapidity with which Sirius is blamed. One of the most glaring discrepancies is the assumption that James and Lily would entrust the secret of their hiding place to someone they didn't completely trust. If we accept the theory that the Potters decided to switch their secret keeper at the last moment, a decision that went unnoticed by Voldemort, it raises a crucial question. Why didn't Sirius know about the change? Sirius, as one of James's closest friends, was supposed to be the Potter's secret keeper. If James had truly made a last-minute decision to change the secret keeper without informing Sirius, it implies that James didn't trust his best friend enough to share this vital information. This introduces a disconcerting layer of mistrust into the seemingly unshakable bond between them. How could James, a person who had shared so much with Sirius, including his deepest fears and hopes, suddenly withhold such an important piece of information? The fact that Sirius was kept in the dark about this crucial change indicates a level of insecurity or doubt that is deeply troubling. If James had doubts about Sirius, why would he place his family's fate in his hands? Furthermore, Lily's role in this scenario is equally perplexing. She was not only James's wife, but also someone who understood the deep, emotional ties between her husband and Sirius. Their friendship was legendary, and the bond they shared was often depicted as unbreakable. But if Lily truly knew how close James and Sirius were, why did she not insist on having a more open conversation with him about the security of their family? Why did she not push for transparency, especially when it came to something as crucial as their secret keeper? Given the looming threat of Voldemort, wouldn't it have made sense for Lily to ensure that every detail was clarified and confirmed, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable reality that things may not be as perfect as they seemed? It's difficult to ignore the implications of this ambiguity. In the chaos surrounding their decision to switch the secret keeper, did Lily and James inadvertently create a situation ripe for miscommunication? Was there a moment where they both assumed the other would make the right call, but neither took the time to confirm that they were on the same page? Their deaths, which came swiftly after the betrayal, might have been a direct result of these missteps, and it's not unreasonable to wonder if they could have been avoided. The lack of a clear and open conversation, the failure to fully trust and communicate, could have cost them their lives. Moreover, the way Sirius is so quickly forgiven after he is proven innocent further complicates matters. When Harry learns the truth in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he discovers that Sirius was not the traitor, but instead Peter Pettigrew was the one who betrayed the Potters. Yet, even after this revelation, one must ask, why did James and Lily forgive Sirius so quickly, considering how their trust in him was seemingly shaken? While it's certainly understandable that they would want to believe in the best in their friend, the speed with which they absolved him is striking. Given the gravity of the situation, their deaths, could it be that they were simply too eager to forgive him, to believe in his innocence, because of the emotional weight of their history together? It's crucial to understand the emotional dynamics at play here. James and Lily were young parents living in a world on the brink of destruction. Their love for each other and their son, Harry, was undeniable, but so was their fear of Voldemort's power. They knew their time was running out, and they had to make difficult decisions. In their final days, were they trying to preserve their family and their closest friendships by choosing to forgive too easily? Did they believe that forgiveness would bring them peace, even if it meant overlooking some of the cracks in their relationships? Their decision to forgive Sirius without question could have been an attempt to hold on to the idea of a perfect friendship, one that had been built over years of shared experiences. But this idealization, this desire to preserve their image of Sirius, may have clouded their judgment in ways that ultimately contributed to their downfall. James's blind trust in Sirius, the person he chose to be his best man, the person who shared the most intimate parts of his life, could have been his undoing. If James had trusted his gut and questioned the dynamics of his relationships more deeply, perhaps he would have seen the subtle signs of betrayal that were being woven into their friendship. Could it be that James never truly saw Sirius as a potential threat, even when the weight of the war loomed larger than ever? His unwavering faith in Sirius may have left him vulnerable to the very betrayal he never expected. Similarly, Lily's role in this tragic story is often overlooked. While she may have been the more grounded of the two, her trust in Sirius also played a significant role in the ultimate betrayal. As someone who understood the stakes of the war and the importance of their actions, why did she not push harder for a more thorough discussion about the secret keeper? Why did she not demand complete transparency from both James and Sirius? Perhaps her belief in the unbreakable nature of their friendship blinded her to the possibility that things might not be as perfect as they seemed. The rapid forgiveness of Sirius by both James and Lily raises important questions about the nature of their relationships. While it's clear that they loved him dearly, it's also clear that their judgment was clouded by their emotional attachment to him. Could the death of the Potters have been avoided if they had acted with more caution, if they had pushed harder for clarity and truth? It's a painful thought, but it's one that adds a layer of tragedy to the already devastating loss of Lily and James Potter. The consequences of their failure to communicate clearly, and the quickness with which they forgave the one person who had failed them, might have been the final piece that led to their untimely deaths. In the end, the death of the Potters is a tragedy of epic proportions, not just because of the loss of two beloved characters, but also because of the complex web of relationships and emotions that led to their downfall. The forgiveness of Sirius, the failure to fully trust, and the the lack of open communication all played roles in the events that unfolded. It's a reminder that even the closest of friendships can be torn apart by a lack of understanding, by the failure to ask the hard questions, and by the fear of confronting uncomfortable truths. The consequences of these decisions were devastating, and they serve as a warning to us all about the importance of trust, communication, and transparency in our relationships. Number 23. Lily didn't understand the world she lived in. Lily Potter is often remembered as the epitome of kindness, compassion, and goodness, a woman whose actions embodied the very qualities that made her a beloved figure in the wizarding world. As a mother, she was the ultimate protector, willing to sacrifice her life for her son, Harry, and her selflessness was heralded as one of the defining aspects of her character. Yet, when viewed through a different lens, one that considers the harsh realities of war, it becomes evident that Lily was not just a gentle soul, she was also a fighter, someone who understood the weight of the world's darkness and had the strength to face it head-on. Lily's involvement in the Order of the Phoenix, an organization that fought fiercely against the Dark Lord, suggests that she was no mere innocent bystander caught in a battle for survival. To be a member of such a resistance group required more than just idealism. It demanded courage, commitment, and a willingness to embrace the brutal aspects of war. The Order was not a place for those seeking only peaceful resolutions. It was a place for those who were prepared to take lives, if necessary, to protect their own. Lily was not, in fact, the peaceful, passive figure that many might assume. She was a witch who had come of age in a world filled with threats and dangers, where alliances were forged in the fires of conflict. While she might have been known for her nurturing nature, Lily's capacity for violence was not to be underestimated. As a member of the Order, she was not simply casting spells in defense of her family. She was actively involved in a war where the stakes were high and there was no room for hesitation or mercy. The battlefield was not a place for kindness alone. Lily's presence in the Order speaks volumes about her ability to put aside her gentler inclinations in order to stand up for what she believed was right. In the final years of her life, Lily's resolve was tested repeatedly. She faced enemies who were determined to destroy everything she held dear, and the idea that she was a peaceful soul does not align with the reality of the fierce choices she had to make. The notion that Lily was a docile, flower-like figure in her personal life is a misrepresentation of the woman who fought fiercely alongside James Potter, her husband, and the rest of the Order's members. The fact that she was so deeply involved in a movement that required the ultimate sacrifice shows that she was willing to fight, to harm, and possibly to kill, to protect those she loved. It is essential to remember that Lily's world was one in which war and death were an ever-present threat. When she made the decision to join the Order, she made a commitment that extended far beyond mere words. She became a part of a struggle that was defined by conflict, and she was forced to confront the harsh truths of life in the magical world. Even her best friend, Severus Snape, whom Lily had once cared for, was a symbol of the moral ambiguity that defined the war. Their relationship, which had once been filled with the innocence of childhood, eventually crumbled under the weight of their differing values. Lily's inability to forgive Snape for his allegiance to the Dark Lord was not a simple matter of personal conflict. It was a reflection of the larger, more complex reality of the time. Lily had no illusions about the cost of standing against Voldemort, and in her heart she understood that some relationships were beyond repair. In the context of Lily's war efforts, the belief that she was merely a kind, passive individual seems increasingly unlikely. Instead, her character reveals itself as someone who, despite her deep love for her family and her values, was willing to take up arms in a battle that required unflinching commitment. Her association with the Order of the Phoenix was not simply a result of her compassion, it was a reflection of her resilience, her understanding of the dangerous world she inhabited, and her refusal to allow the forces of evil to take hold of the future. James Potter, Lily's husband, provides further insight into the complex nature of her character. Like Lily, James was a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and like her, he was willing to lay down his life for a cause larger than himself. Their relationship was founded not only on love, but also on a shared sense of duty and responsibility. James and Lily were not passive bystanders. They were soldiers in a war that defined the future of the wizarding world. They were not only parents, they were leaders in a resistance movement. Their love for Harry was undeniably fierce, but it was their commitment to the cause that shaped much of their relationship and ultimately led to their tragic deaths. Lily's determination to fight against Voldemort was not without its consequences. The decision to go into hiding, to leave behind her life in order to protect Harry, was a sacrifice that she made not just for her son, but for the larger war effort. She knew that her decision to oppose the Dark Lord would likely lead to death, yet she chose to take that risk, understanding that her actions could potentially save countless others. In this light, Lily's choices reveal a woman who was not afraid to stand up for her beliefs, even when it meant facing the possibility of her own demise. Her love for Harry was the ultimate form of sacrifice, but it was not born from a sense of meekness. Lily's death, though tragic, was not the death of a passive, gentle figure. It was the death of a woman who had stood up to evil and had made the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. The selflessness that Lily exhibited in the face of certain death was a reflection of her strength, not her fragility. She chose to die in defense of her family, and in doing so, she demonstrated a powerful inner resolve. Lily's courage was not limited to her role as a mother. It extended to her role as a fighter in a war where survival was far from guaranteed. While her compassion and love for her family were paramount, she was also a woman who understood the necessity of taking action. She was no stranger to the harsh realities of life in the wizarding world, and she had the strength to act when the time came. The world may remember Lily Potter as a symbol of kindness and selflessness, but it is crucial to recognize that she was also a warrior, one who was unafraid to make hard decisions and sacrifices in order to secure a better future for those she loved. In the end, Lily's legacy is a complex one, shaped not only by her love and sacrifice, but also by her unwavering determination to stand against the forces of darkness. She was not a figure who existed solely to inspire admiration for her kindness. She was a woman who, when the time came, fought with all the strength and resilience she had. Her love for Harry was a driving force in her life, but so too was her commitment to the fight against Voldemort, a fight that she understood would come with great personal cost. In remembering Lily Potter, we must not forget the fierce, unwavering spirit that guided her actions and made her the true hero she was. Number 24, James never admitted his mistakes. James Potter was always seen as the golden boy of Gryffindor, the brilliant Quidditch player, the daring student, and the charming young man who captured the heart of Lily Evans. His legacy in the wizarding world is clouded by his association with Lily, the courage he showed in fighting against Voldemort, and the tragic heroism of his death. However, when examined closely, James's life is far from a tale of pure heroism and unwavering virtue. James was a flawed young man, someone who made serious mistakes without ever truly acknowledging them, let alone seeking redemption. The notion that he grew into a more understanding person is a belief held by some, but is it grounded in the canon of Harry Potter? Was James truly a better man before his untimely death, or did he simply shift his focus to something else, Lily, and continue on without addressing the harm he had done to others? One of the most revealing moments about James's character comes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry sees a memory of his father humiliating Severus Snape. It is a moment that stands out in the entire series because it shows James's darker side. The image of James Potter bullying Snape is so sharply in contrast to the hero James is often portrayed as, especially in the eyes of Harry, that it serves as a sharp contradiction to the commonly accepted image of James as an upstanding young man. The memory is cruel and uncomfortable. James, with his friends Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, mocks Snape mercilessly, calling him names and using their power to push him around. The behavior is consistent with the arrogant Gryffindor stereotype that the story often associates with James, but it also goes much deeper. The humiliation Snape faces is not merely the result of youthful pranks, it's the vindictive action of a young man who thinks he's untouchable, protected by his friends and his popularity. The problem is that this scene doesn't just serve as a moment of high school drama, it also reveals something about James's emotional immaturity and lack of self-awareness. At the time of this incident, James was already a prominent figure in the wizarding world. His bravery was established, his role in fighting the forces of darkness was unquestionable. However, this memory, captured in the pensive, shows a man who was not the hero we often imagine him to be. There is no moment in the books where James himself acknowledges this behavior, no scene where he looks back at his teenage actions and expresses regret. There is no apology to Snape, and there is no moment where he openly recognizes that he has hurt someone. Even though James did grow older, did he grow wiser in a way that would allow him to confront and repent for the wrongs of his youth? The evidence from the canon suggests otherwise. The clearest clue to this lies in the way James handles the situation with Lily. From the moment he meets her, there is an obvious shift in his priorities. His past behavior towards Snape and others seems to be forgotten as James's new goal becomes winning Lily's heart. It's as though his previous faults have been relegated to the background as he fixates on this new, seemingly more important pursuit. We see this reflected in the way he interacts with Lily during their time at Hogwarts, where his arrogant streak, the same one that led to his tormenting of Snape, takes the form of trying to impress her. Often through displays of physical strength or reckless daring, James's interactions with Lily are full of intensity and passion, but they are not free from the same hubris that marked his earlier years. Even as he matures, as he grows into a man who will one day be a husband and a father, his sense of entitlement remains intact. His love for Lily, while real, is underpinned by the same overwhelming belief that he deserves to win her affections. He doesn't necessarily think about how he might have hurt Lily with his behavior in the past, or how his previous actions might influence her feelings. Instead, he pushes forward, convinced that his courage and his feelings are enough to secure her love. This view of James as someone who shifts his focus but never takes a moment to reflect or repent for his wrongdoings can be seen in the way Lily herself treats him. She does not readily forgive him for his arrogance and his bullying. In fact, Lily resists him for a long time, even when James matures into a better, more capable wizard. Her resistance is not born of mere annoyance at his persistent advances, but rather from her memory of the man he was in their younger years. She had witnessed firsthand the cruelty James displayed, and no matter how much he grew in stature, that past behavior left a shadow over their interactions. Even when James eventually wins her heart, there is no suggestion that he has ever fully acknowledged the hurt he caused, particularly to Snape. Harry, in his journey to understand his parents, never finds a moment where James publicly admits his faults. He doesn't see a father who, as an adult, recognizes that his previous treatment of Snape was wrong. Instead, Harry only learns about these events second-hand, from Sirius, from Lupin, and from Snape himself. The fact that James never directly addresses his past behavior leaves Harry with an incomplete image of his father, one that doesn't offer a true sense of closure or redemption. While James is remembered fondly by his friends and loved ones, there is no indication that he ever truly reckoned with the consequences of his actions. He may have grown up, but did he ever grow into someone who could admit his mistakes? One might argue that James's actions as a father offer some redemption, especially considering the way he fiercely protected Harry. He died fighting Voldemort, a symbol of ultimate courage, sacrificing his life for his family. In many ways, this sacrifice is the ultimate act of redemption, as James literally gives his life to protect his son. However, this act does not erase the mistakes of his youth, nor does it address the fact that he never sought forgiveness for them. The fact that he died young would be arcane with so much left unsaid means that the man he became is still somewhat of a mystery. His heroic death cannot wash away the darker aspects of his personality that were evident in his youth. The absence of an apology or acknowledgement of his past behavior speaks volumes about James's character. It suggests that while he may have matured and shifted his focus, he never really dealt with the deeper emotional issues that led to his actions. His transformation from a school bully to a loving father and brave hero is not one of moral clarity, but rather one of avoidance. Rather than confronting his faults, he simply moved on to new goals, like winning Lily's love and becoming a father. The fact that he never takes the time to truly reflect on his past means that his growth, while evident in some areas, remains incomplete in others. In the end, James Potter is a man who is remembered for his courage, his wit, and his sacrifices. But beneath the surface, there is a man who never fully reckoned with his mistakes, who never truly asked for forgiveness. The question remains, did James Potter ever truly change? Was he merely a man who grew older and more focused on his goals, or did he evolve into a wiser and more humble person? The answer, it seems, is left unfinished, just like the story of his life. Severus, in his own bitterness, never forgave Lily for that rejection, for the way she had discarded him after years of devotion. But in truth, it may not have been just the rejection that hurt him so deeply. It was the realization that Lily had always known the power she held over him, and that when it suited her, she had used it. And perhaps that was the most painful truth of all for Severus Snape to accept. Number 25. Lily might have used Snape. Lily Potter had always been the object of admiration for Severus Snape. Ever since their childhood, he had watched her with a kind of intense devotion that only the most obsessive of love could cultivate. He was always at her side, ready to support her, to help her. Severus, awkward and often out of place in the Gryffindor Tower, found comfort in Lily's presence. His feelings for her went beyond friendship. They were tangled in admiration, desire, and perhaps a desperate need for validation. Lily, however, was always distant. She was polite, kind, and often seemed to tolerate Severus's presence, but was never fully open. She was surrounded by friends, confident in her place at Hogwarts, while Severus, isolated by his own insecurities, only saw in her a glimpse of the acceptance he craved. Lily, for her part, knew how deeply Severus cared for her. She was not blind to his infatuation, nor was she naive about the depth of his feelings. She may not have reciprocated them in the way he had hoped, but she understood the power she had over him. This realization could have been both comforting and intoxicating for Lily. There was something undeniably gratifying about being the center of someone's world, about knowing that someone would do anything for you, no matter how badly they were treated. Severus was devoted to her, and this devotion, for Lily, became a subtle form of power. For years, she kept Severus close, never fully cutting him off. She endured his awkwardness, his oddness, and the way he clung to her. He was always the one who sought her out, always the one to beg for forgiveness when he had made a mistake. She allowed it because she was aware that he would always come back. Even when Severus's attitudes became more aligned with dark ideologies, Lily kept him in her orbit, perhaps out of habit, perhaps because she was accustomed to the control she wielded over him. She was, after all, the one who could make him bow to her. She was the one who knew exactly how far to push him before he would retreat back into the shadows of his own self-loathing, only to return again when she beckoned. It was only when Severus crossed a line, when he called her a mudblood, that Lily made her decision. Until that moment she had tolerated his presence, even if it was one that made her uncomfortable. She had allowed him to linger in her life, knowing that he would always return, that his love for her was a constant. But in that moment when Severus insulted her, something shifted. Lily could no longer maintain the illusion of friendship with him. Severus had crossed the line between admiration and hatred, between devotion and something darker. She could no longer pretend that their bond was anything other than one-sided. Her rejection of him was final, cold, and unyielding. What is most telling about Lily's reaction is how different it was from everything that had come before. She was not merely angry at the insult. She was not just hurt by the cruelty of the word he had used. She was rejecting him not just as a person, but as someone who had once been her friend, her confidant. Lily was not just angry at Severus for what he said, but for the way in which he had allowed his hatred to taint the years of affection they had shared. She was angry that Severus, the person who had once been so devoted to her, had transformed into something she could no longer recognize. And perhaps most painfully, she was angry that he had dared to show that he had no regard for the bond they had once shared. For Lily, this moment marked a sharp break, a division between the past and the future. She could no longer tolerate someone who had once been her closest friend turning into a person who so easily betrayed their shared history. This moment, this choice to cut Severus off, felt final. But it was not the first time Lily had chosen to use his affection for her to maintain control. Severus had been the one to constantly return to her, the one who had always come back no matter how many times she pushed him away, no matter how many times she rejected his advances. She had known he would always return, and she had allowed it for a time. But in that moment when Severus insulted her, she saw the danger of keeping someone in her orbit who was no longer willing to respect her boundaries. The affection she had once enjoyed from him had turned into something more dangerous, something toxic, and she could no longer afford to maintain that connection. Looking at it from this perspective, it becomes clear that Lily's relationship with Severus was not entirely innocent. She may have loved him once, as a friend, as a person who had been by her side for years, but she also knew the power she had over him. Severus's love for her was not something she took lightly, and it was not something she ignored. She had allowed him to remain in her life for as long as it suited her. She had allowed him to worship her, to care for her, but only to the point where it remained on her terms. She had never fully reciprocated his feelings, and when she did eventually find someone who she could Love in the way Severus had loved her, James Potter, she made a choice. Lily chose James not just because of his love for her, but because he was someone who could offer her something Severus could not, an equal partnership. James had always been confident, charismatic, and sure of himself in a way Severus could never be. Severus's love for Lily was the kind that demanded, that needed validation, that sought to prove itself in every moment. But James, with his own sense of self-worth, was able to offer her something different. His love was not built on desperation, on a need to be needed. It was built on mutual respect, on a partnership that was not about one person holding all the power. Severus's love for Lily was based on a kind of devotion that bordered on obsession, but James's love for Lily was built on something deeper, something that was more sustainable and real. When Lily finally chose James over Severus, it was not just a rejection of Severus's love, it was also a rejection of the dynamic that had existed between them. She had always been the one in control, the one who held the power in their relationship. But with James, the power dynamic was different. She was no longer the one who held all the cards. She was no longer the one who could manipulate someone else's love for her. With James, she found something that was more equal, more balanced. Lily's actions, when viewed through this lens, suggest that she had always been aware of the power she held over Severus. She had known that he would always return to her, and she had used that to her advantage. But when that power dynamic shifted, when Severus no longer held her attention, she discarded him. Lily's decision to sever ties with Severus was not just about his betrayal, but about her desire to regain control over her life. She chose James because he offered her something different, something she could not get from Severus. And in doing so, she cut Severus off, coldly, decisively, perhaps even without a second thought. Severus, in his own bitterness, never forgave Lily for that rejection, for the way she had discarded him after years of devotion. But in truth, it may not have been just the rejection that hurt him so deeply. It was the realization that Lily had always known the power she held over him, and that, when it suited her, she had used it. And perhaps that was the most painful truth of all for Severus Snape to accept. Number 26. James joined the war for fame. James Potter was a name that stood out in the wizarding world, not just because of his role in the infamous Marauders, but also due to his reputation as a war hero. But what if there was more to his decision to join the Order of the Phoenix than the lofty ideals of protecting the innocent and defeating dark forces? It's easy to view James as a figure of purity, a noble young man driven by the desire to do good. However, looking deeper into his character and his motivations, a different picture emerges, one that suggests James may have been less interested in heroism for its own sake and more driven by the pursuit of glory, fame, and status. From a young age, James displayed an overwhelming charisma, the kind that naturally drew people to him. Whether it was on the Quidditch pitch or in the halls of Hogwarts, he was a force to be reckoned with. A born leader, James had a magnetism that made him stand out among his peers, a trait that could easily fuel a desire for validation and recognition. And in a world already filled with extraordinary figures, who could blame him for seeking even greater distinction? He wasn't just a Quidditch captain or a school hero. He became one of the key figures in the fight against Voldemort, a leader in the Order of the Phoenix. But was this really an act of selflessness or a desire to carve out his place in history? James's decision to join the Order came at a time when Voldemort's rise to power posed a serious threat to the safety of the wizarding world. The battle lines were drawn and the pressure was mounting. But war, in a sense, provides a stage, a place where a person can demonstrate their courage and skill, where bravery is rewarded with admiration. James was well aware of the glory associated with war heroes, the respect they commanded, the stories that would be told for generations. To be a hero, to be someone remembered by history, that kind of status was irresistible to a young man like James. His motivations, perhaps, were not purely idealistic. James had a reputation for being a bit reckless, often acting on impulse and bravado. It was this same daring nature that earned him a spot in the Order of the Phoenix. But just as he had been drawn to Quidditch for the thrill of competition and the chance to shine, so too might he have seen the war as a chance to prove his worth in a far grander arena. The wizarding world was at war, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. What better opportunity to establish oneself as a hero than in the middle of a battle that would determine the fate of all? Throughout his life, James was used to being admired. He had a certain charm, a confidence that at times bordered on arrogance. This arrogance was often directed at those who didn't meet his expectations, like Severus Snape, whose lowly status in James's eyes made him an easy target for ridicule. James's actions towards Snape, bullying and belittling him, hinted at a darker side of his personality, one that was less about justice and more about asserting dominance. The dynamic between James and Snape is revealing. Snape, who later became a double agent for the Order, had more than a few reasons to hate James, but James's behavior suggests that he felt secure in his position and in his ability to maintain the upper hand. In his desire for status, James likely saw his participation in the war as a natural extension of his personality. The thrill of battle, the recognition that came with it, and the camaraderie shared with fellow members of the Order, all of these elements combined to feed into James's need for validation. As a man who was used to being the center of attention, the Order must have seemed like the perfect stage for someone like him to shine. The enemy was formidable, the risks high, but the rewards were equally grand. After all, a war hero was someone who would never be forgotten, someone whose name would echo through the ages. It's crucial to acknowledge the role that Lily Evans played in James's life, though. Lily, unlike James, was a deeply empathetic person, driven by a genuine desire to protect and to help. While James's motivations for joining the Order may have been partly driven by his ego and a desire for recognition, Lily's reasons were far more grounded in her sense of moral responsibility. She wasn't participating in the war for glory, but out of love for the people she cared about and a desire to ensure the survival of a world she valued. Still, their relationship was complicated. James admired Lily for her intellect and her unwavering sense of right and wrong, but their dynamic wasn't without conflict. The fact that Lily initially rejected James's advances speaks volumes about her feelings toward him. Perhaps at the time she didn't see James as a man of substance, but someone who was more interested in his own reputation than in the values that truly mattered. Their eventual marriage, however, paints a picture of a man who had matured and learned to appreciate the deeper values that Lily embodied. James's desire for glory may have faded over time as he came to understand the true cost of war. Yet it's impossible to ignore that he initially entered the fray not with the purest of intentions, but with an innate desire to prove himself, to make his mark on the world. It wasn't just about defeating Voldemort for the sake of the wizarding world. It was also about proving that James Potter was a hero worth remembering. The death of James and Lily Potter, particularly in the way it happened, with their sacrifice for their son, Harry, adds a bittersweet layer to this story. The fact that they were killed in a moment of selflessness and love contrasts sharply with the image of James as a young man who may have initially seen the war as a chance for personal glory. It's easy to overlook the fact that James, in his final moments, demonstrated the kind of bravery that transcended his earlier motivations. But the fact remains that his path to this point was one of personal growth and self-discovery. By the time of his death, he had evolved from a man driven by pride and a thirst for recognition into someone who understood the true meaning of sacrifice. It's also worth noting that James's journey in the war mirrored the growth of his character. As the conflict escalated, he became more than just a soldier or a leader in the order. He became a symbol of the kind of bravery that was required to defeat Voldemort. However, this symbol was forged in the crucible of his personal experiences, not just the idealistic vision he may have had at the outset of the war. His character arc was shaped by his relationships, his triumphs, and his failures, all of which contributed to the man he became by the time of his death. In the end, the story of James Potter is far more complex than the simple narrative of a young man who joined the fight for what was right. His journey was one of transformation, from a man who sought glory to one who found redemption through love and sacrifice. James may have entered the war with a desire to prove himself, but in his final act, he proved something far greater, that heroism is not about recognition or status, but about the willingness to protect and to give everything for the people you love. Number 27, their sacrifice wasn't that unique. The legend of James and Lily Potter, who gave their lives to save their son Harry, is one that echoes through the pages of the Harry Potter saga. The sacrifice they made is considered one of the most defining moments in wizarding history. The magical world reveres them as martyrs, and their untimely deaths are woven into the very fabric of the war against Voldemort. Yet when viewed from a more detached perspective, their fate might seem less exceptional. The truth is, thousands of witches and wizards died during the First Wizarding War, many of them just as noble, just as brave, and yet none of them have been immortalized the way James and Lily have. It is undeniable that their deaths played a pivotal role in Voldemort's downfall. When Lily's act of self-sacrifice protected Harry from the killing curse, it left Voldemort vulnerable. However, this moment of heroism was not unique to them. Throughout the war, countless other individuals sacrificed their lives for the greater good. People like Edgar Bones, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, or Frank and Alice Longbottom, who also gave their lives for their son Neville. These individuals died fighting the Dark Lord's forces, but unlike the Potters, their deaths never reached the level of mythic proportions. The Potters' story is filled with elements that create a compelling narrative, but it's important to recognize that their heroism is not as extraordinary as it seems when taken in isolation. The myth of their sacrifice has been magnified by the emotional lens through which it is viewed. We often see their deaths as tragic and singular because Harry survived. This survival, the fact that he lived to tell the tale, is what separates them from the rest. Their sacrifice becomes more than a personal tragedy. It becomes the defining moment of the war. Harry's survival is a miracle, and in that miracle, the Potters' deaths gain a sense of rare, untouchable significance. But in reality, many others sacrifice their lives for similar causes without receiving the same reverence. There is also the fact that James and Lily were young, vibrant, and full of potential. They were beloved figures in the wizarding world, known for their courage and beauty. Their youthfulness adds another layer to the myth. People naturally gravitate towards stories of beautiful young people, especially when they die tragically. But how many others fit this description, their stories untold and forgotten? Consider the case of Lily's friend Alice Longbottom. Alice, much like Lily, was a brilliant and kind-hearted witch who stood against the Dark Lord. But her death and her husband Frank's was less spectacular, perhaps because they did not have the same narrative surrounding their son's survival. Neville Longbottom's story was not intertwined with miraculous survival at the time of their deaths, and therefore their deaths became a footnote despite their courage. When we consider the story of James and Lily, we must also understand that their sacrifice was not entirely a selfless act. It was not solely a noble decision, but one made under extreme duress. The Potters had been in hiding for over a year before they were ultimately betrayed. The death of James and Lily came as a direct result of the prophecy that foretold Harry's defeat of Voldemort. James and Lily had made the choice to fight, but they were not the only ones who made that decision. The wizarding world was rife with people willing to lay down their lives for a cause, for family, or for a larger purpose, to elevate. Potter's death above others is to risk forgetting the countless others who were not so fortunate. We also need to reflect on the politics surrounding their deaths. James and Lily's sacrifice was, in part, the result of an act of betrayal. Peter Pettigrew, a close friend of James, betrayed them to Voldemort, leading directly to their deaths. This betrayal adds an element of tragedy to their story, one that makes it more poignant. But the fact that they died as a result of betrayal does not necessarily make their deaths more meaningful than others who died fighting the Dark Lord. People like Cedric Diggory, who was killed by Voldemort in the Triwizard Tournament, or Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, who died in the Second Wizarding War, were also victims of betrayal and tragedy. The key difference is that their deaths, though equally tragic, do not have the same narrative power because there was no child of theirs to survive. The role of the prophecy in their death also calls into question the nature of their sacrifice. The prophecy, which suggested that Harry was the only one who could defeat Voldemort, seemed to doom both Harry and his parents to this ultimate fate. It was not solely an act of valor or destiny, but a consequence of the inevitable forces at play. To some extent, the Potters were caught in the web of fate, much as many others in the war were. Their deaths may have been heroic, but they were also a part of the larger tragic narrative that plagued the wizarding world during this time. Harry's survival is not so much a testament to their singular heroism, but a fluke of destiny, something that could have been anyone else's son had things fallen differently. Even their involvement in the war itself is not entirely exceptional. James Potter, in his younger years, was known for his reckless behavior, and he made enemies long before Voldemort came into power. His tendency to pick fights and his early rebellious nature were not always seen as heroic qualities. He became a member of the Order of the Phoenix, yes, but his actions, while courageous, were not out of the ordinary for someone in his position. Similarly, Lily's role in the fight against Voldemort was undoubtedly courageous, but she was not the only one. Many other witches and wizards had made similar choices, and their deaths went unnoticed simply because their stories were not tied to a surviving child. The creation of the myth surrounding the Potter's death is in many ways a function of Harry's own legacy. He is the one who survived, the one who lived to tell their story. This means that the narrative of their sacrifice is preserved, forever intertwined with Harry's journey. But we must not forget that this is a story constructed by time, memory, and emotion. The Potters' deaths were a part of the larger tapestry of loss and tragedy that defined the First Wizarding War. They were not the only ones who gave their lives, nor were they the only ones whose deaths were filled with meaning. It is Harry's survival and the powerful myth that it created that has elevated their sacrifice to such legendary status. When we strip away the layers of myth and emotion, we see that James and Lily Potter's deaths were not exceptional. They were not the only ones who made sacrifices, and their deaths did not define the course of the war. They were brave, yes, but they were also just two more people caught in the wave of destruction that was Voldemort's rise to power. They are remembered because of the miraculous survival of their son, but their deaths were not more significant than those of countless others who fought and died in the same war. In the end, the Potter's story is a reminder of the fragility of heroism and the impermanence of life. We remember them because of Harry, because of the story he lived to tell. But their sacrifice was, in many ways, a tragedy among many others, not one to be placed on a pedestal above all others. Their deaths are part of the same tragic history that shaped the wizarding world during the rise and fall of Voldemort. And while their legacy lives on, it is ultimately a reflection of the larger sacrifices made by so many. The myth of their exceptional sacrifice is just that, a myth, and one that does not fully capture the complexity of their lives or the realities of war.